We're going to do something a little different today, a blast from the past, way back. We're going to do about Esquirita. Esquirita was from Greenville, South Carolina, and I'm going to read an article that was in the Greenville Journal in 2021, and by Vincent Harris, and it's a good article about Esquirita. But he was the muse, you might as well say, for Little Richard. You can find other articles and things on YouTube about Esquirita, and his music is on Apple Play, so you need to check that out. At the end, I'll put some pictures of his albums and stuff that came off of Apple Play. But this is Rockin' the Joint with Esquirita, Greenville's flamboyant, forgotten rock pioneer. Vincent Harris, February 25th, 2021. Way back in the 1950s, a flamboyant, gay African-American piano-pounding daredevil came screaming out of the South. Sporting a pencil-thin mustache, a face covered in pancake makeup, and a pompadour piled to the heavens, and the ability to scream, "Woo!" like a banshee on a series of leering, innuendo-laden, raw rock and roll tunes. And his name wasn't Little Richard. Talking about Greenville, South Carolina's own trailblazing Esquirita Jr., better known as Esquirita. It's impossible not to hear the echoes of Little Richard on Esquirita's most raucous numbers, like the careening 1958 raver Rockin' the Joint, or 1959's Hey Miss Lucy, which features the lines, "Hey Miss Lucy, you're too fat and juicy for me." When he lets out gospel meets hellfire wail, the resemblance is uncanny. And that's because, as Little Richard happily admitted throughout his life, he learned a lot from Reader. Born in Greenville in 1938, some sources list his birth year as 1935, Reader lived in Greasy Corner, now known as the West End, and was a self-taught piano player who was raised on gospel music. He took off from Greenville in his teens to join traveling gospel shows, playing piano with Little Sister Rosa and Brother Joe May. He and Little Richard met when Sister Rosa and Reader stepped off a bus in Macon, Georgia. In the early 1950s, a young Richard Penniman, doing a little people watching at the bus station, was transfixed by the tall 6 feet 2 inches of him. On that fabled night in 1951, or 52, no one seems quite sure, the man who would become Little Richard took Reader back to his house, sat him down at the piano, and simply watched the show as Reader pounded out the wild version of One Mint Julep. He was one of the greatest pianists, and that's including Jerry Lee Lewis, Stevie Wonder, or anybody I've ever heard, Little Richard once said of Reader. He had the biggest hands of anybody I have ever seen. His hands was about the size of 2 of my hands put together. Reader tried his hand at gospel for years and even recorded in New York with the gospel group Heavenly Echoes in 1955. Reader left the gospel world when he moved back to Greenville in the late 50s and began playing R&B and rock. Wearing rhinestone cakes and sporting 2 wigs, he played places like the Owl Club on Washington Street, while Little Richard's star rose and fell. But it wasn't until rockabilly legend Gene Vincent's guitarist Paul Peek discovered Reader in 1958 that he officially recorded under the name Esquirita. Unleashing a series of raw, chaotic rock and roll singles like "Oh Baby," "Rockin' the Joint," and "Laid Off" for Capitol Records in the late 1950s. Of those Capitol singles, esteemed rock critic Cub Sakota wrote, "They stand as some of the most untamed and unabashed sides ever issued by a major label." While none of those singles burned up the charts, Reader sustained his recording career throughout the 1960s. working in Detroit, Nashville, and New Orleans with a dazzling array of musicians, including Dr. John, Jimi Hendrix, Alan Toussaint, probably didn't pronounce that right, and eventually Little Richard himself. Reeder ended up in New York City in the early 80s, eking out a living, playing small clubs before dying from age-related complications in Harlem in 1986. It was a sad end for a performer who deserved better. Without Esquirita's voice, piano playing, and over-the-top style, there would have been no Little Richard, an influence on countless eye-catching, androgynous, flamboyant rock and soul icons that we know and love. So as we pause to remember that great African-American artist, this was done during Black History Month, and he put, remember Esquirita's name, and remember that this is unheralded pioneer came right here in Greenville. And my late boyfriend, the dogs are barking, my late boyfriend, Suitcase Simpson, when he was young, sold insurance, and he said he sold insurance to Esquirita's mama and said she was one of the most beautiful ladies you'll ever see. Now, let me show you some of his albums and listen to the music of one of his songs.